Hello, and welcome to Tarot and Attachment. My name is Erin Smith. I am a professional tarot reader and an associate marriage and family therapist in the state of California. And I like to do these weekly readings to connect with other people, to offer up insight or guidance that I feel may be helpful to the collective. It is my way of feeling like I'm giving back and contributing something. It makes me feel connected both to myself, to others, and to the universe at large. I enjoy receiving these downloads of insight, and I appreciate the opportunity to share them with all of you. So, if you enjoy this content, I invite you to follow along by subscribing to the channel. Feel free to engage in conversation in the comments. I was thinking about what I might want to dive into this week. I know that we are going to be having a new moon, partial solar eclipse coming up at the end of this week. And, the full moon that we had was actually a solar eclipse. And these astronomical events are archetypally associated with major resets. Um, and again, things that play out personally also have an effect out there in the collective. So, the way that we experience these types of energies is both unique to us, but then tends to have a kind of archetypal quality to it. And so I'm curious, this idea of having a reset, what that might mean, what expressions in the material world might be made manifest and how we can make the most of them, what we need to know about interfacing with this kind of energy of beginning anew. Often people around new moons like to set intentions and watch those intentions grow as the moon gains momentum and becomes full gradually over the course of the month. And, this idea of an eclipse, having the light be temporarily obscured so that we can look into the depths of the darkness, and then having the lights come on, having some great insight that we're able to pull out of the depths of that darkness in order to light the way forward. Again, there's some quality here of understanding, gaining insight, seeing more clearly. And I'm just going to offer it up to the cards. Like, what do we need to know about this process? And how can we make the most of it? So I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to go silent. I'm going to concentrate while I shuffle. You can fast forward to this part if this is tedious. I will be with you momentarily. I'm just going to say a prayer over these cards. So there's a lot of cards that are coming up here that are pointing to the wound that many of us are operating out of all the time, that not only, again, affects us personally, but then how we come together and organize society at large. So for those of you who don't know, my background, like I said, is in, I've been reading tarot for some time, since 2011. And I got my degree in counseling psychology last year. And the thing that drew me to want to become skillfully trained as a therapist is that my experience reading tarot for clients for 10 plus years, hello, Frida, um, is that when certain cards came up in readings, it was illuminating certain experiences within the human condition. And there were certain cards that reliably came up that were pointing out familial wounds, difficult dynamics that were being passed down through the generations, this kind of intergenerational wounding, and how it was showing up in the lives of people that I was reading for, like the ways in which those wounds would manifest in daily interactions, both with other people in their lives, but also in terms of how they viewed themselves. Whether the world felt like a welcoming place or a treacherous place. And, so my deep dive into studying attachment theory and getting a specific type of training in attachment repair. This has been a huge part of my journey. And I feel very dedicated to doing this work in the world. I feel very strongly that so much of what we are seeing in society is related specifically to attachment wounding. I know enough about the background of the people who are implementing these draconian measures in government to know that there was significant abuse and neglect in their family of origins. I mean, I know this just from the public record, right? Donald Trump's niece is a clinical psychologist and wrote a book about their family and the conditions that those children, specifically her father, who is the brother of our president, who died of alcohol-related conditions. He essentially drank himself to death. because of deep, unmitigated depression that comes along with being raised in households of neglect and abuse. These kinds of conditions impact us greatly. And again, it has an effect on our sense of self, who we believe ourselves to be, what we believe ourselves to be capable of. It also affects our ability to connect with others. Am I worthy of being seen and understood? Do I know how to identify my own emotional states and recognize those same emotional states in other people, i.e., empathy? Or have I internalized this idea that it's actually not safe to investigate my emotions or to have an emotional expression? Have I learned that I will be punished or ostracized or exiled if I have the audacity to express an emotion or a need? Again, these are things that we internalize in our families of origin at the earliest stages of development. Attachment is formed in infancy around the age of 1. It is before we have learned to speak, before we acquire language, before we have a narrative sense of self or a distinction between self or other. At that point, we just experience the world through feelings, sensations, impressions. And because in infancy, we can do absolutely nothing on our own, we are utterly and completely dependent on our caregiver's ability to meet our needs. It is a matter of life and death when we cry because we're hungry, that our caregivers are reasonably attentive enough to feed us, to care that we have a need, and to try to offer assistance in the best way possible. If it doesn't happen, it feels like you're going to die. And we build defensive structures. We develop a strategy to try to elicit closeness from our caregivers based on their behavior. So it's what we call an attachment strategy. And, as many of you might know, different conditions create different behavioral responses. If when you cry, it makes your parents angry and they yell at you or they become disorganized, then you shut down your emotional expression. You stop crying. You learn to suppress awareness of your emotions because you really don't want to alienate your parents. If your parents are inconsistent in their attentiveness, sometimes when you cry, they're there offering you comfort and soothing, and sometimes they're discombobulated and absent. And there's this tremendous anxiety that builds up in your system as a young child, where you're constantly trying to take the emotional temperature of the room and figure out what your caregiver needs in order to be attentive to you. And it draws you away from awareness of your internal state of being, and it puts all of the attention on the other. What do you need so that I can get my needs met? And then, of course, if the source of comfort is also the source of fear, if the person that you are naturally, instinctually inclined to go to for comfort and soothing is actually harming you, this is so, the cognitive dissonance is so intense and so terrifying that you become disorganized. There is no one cohesive way of addressing that situation. Sometimes you shut down. Sometimes you're in freeze. Sometimes you're inconsolable and in total distress. Your behavior is all over the map. You don't know how to respond to that type of traumatic overwhelm as a child. And oftentimes those kids grow up having to find ways of coping that look like disassociation. So a lot of people who grew up in households of extreme abuse and neglect, they develop substance use issues. They act out sexually. They are self-harming. So, and this emotional dysregulation, these attachment wounds, again, they affect not only the way we think of ourselves and the way we interact with others, but the planet. The planet. If you're in a state of, if there's no baseline of safety for you, how are you going to think systemically? How are you going to think about caring for the planet and taking the long view, thinking about how your present day reactions or behaviors might affect outcomes way in the future? You're just trying to survive. You're in survival mode. So, Spirit is asking us to look at these types of conditions, how they might be playing out in our own personal lives, and how, as a collective, you get a group of traumatized people together. And what are they going to do? They're going to create a society that is a reaction to that trauma. It's going to be a traumatized society. If I didn't get my needs met, then it instills me with this sense of I'm never safe. There's never enough. I'm constantly grasping for more. It's like an addiction, you know, to the heroin addict who's craving heroin. There's never enough heroin. I need to constantly have more and more to bring me into that state of calm or equilibrium. And as soon as it wears off, I need more. And so again, this idea of like, you know, the richest people in the world who are trying to take money from the poorest people in the world because somehow they haven't gotten it in their heads that they have enough. This intense iniquity that is blinding them to the reality of their own experience, and this inability to feel into what other people are experiencing. This inability to recognize how hoarding money at the top isn't actually making them feel any better, or else they would stop behaving like out of this total sense of madness. This card is what this represents, this identification with the deprivation, this feeling of being alone in the world, destitute and starving, without help, without resources. This is what it feels like when we grow up in households of abuse and neglect. It is this internalization that there's never going to be enough and that I'm not enough to get my needs met. This is the feeling associated with this card. And then there's an inability to tune in to people, institutions, communities that are actually there to offer me assistance. I don't see it. It doesn't seem available to me, right? There's a kind of cognitive distortion that happens when you have been in a prolonged state of deprivation. it's hard to see any alternative. And this is what we see in this card. These orphans are cold and walking through the snow, but they're walking past a church that's lit from within. That means that the lights are on and the doors are open, and all are welcome to come and avail themselves of what they need in order to thrive. And yet, they walk right on by. They cannot see it as a possibility. So, for some of us, that means that we just believe that the good things in life are for everyone else and not for us. So we don't. So we choose unavailable partners. So we choose professional goals that are not sustainable financially. Or we think to ourselves, what's the point of going and getting an advanced degree because, I'll never have what it takes to make it through that process. This idea of like, I can't do it. I don't have enough of what it takes to get my needs met. But then there's this whole other end of the spectrum too, where you have more money than you could ever need in 10 lifetimes, but you still feel deprived. It's never enough. There's not enough to satiate this longing for connection. And there's this inability to recognize that that's the real issue. And so you just keep grasping for more and more and more and more. And of course, that is the devil. That is the total. So when this is your childhood experience, this is what you grow into. You are a slave to the addiction to more. And you don't care whom you hurt in order for you to get what you need. It sets up this system of hierarchy, this power iniquity, this struggle for power that feels like it's being withheld, that you have to do battle with these inner demons. The devil is really about like looking at where we've given our power away because we are convinced that we are powerless. And so we submit to the will of others who would subvert our ability to take action in our own lives. So I often, when this card comes up, and boy, by the way, it keeps coming up. It just keeps showing up in these weekly readings. I mean, it is sort of the theme of what we're dealing with in society right now. And there is an expression here of learned helplessness. I mean, really, in some ways, both of these cards are saying the same thing. The appearance, if you're just really skimming the surface, is that there's no hope. You're just wandering around in the world alone. But maybe we're missing something. Maybe there are opportunities to thrive, to make use of the resources that are ever available, whether that's the kindness of people in communities or literal financial resources. Like, how can we tune in to that assistance? And again, here, these chains amongst our primordial people here, they're very loose. We can free ourselves from this bondage that in some ways we are complying with by not fighting back, by not taking our power back, by assuming this is the only way that it has to be, right? Well, we're just capitalism, it's just the way that it is, rather than imagining a world, a society that is more loving, more compassionate, that cares about the health and well-being of all its members, to offer that material assistance, to give everyone equal access to resources that are available in society. And by all accounts, there are plenty. They do not have to be hoarded at the top. It's not doing them any good anyway. They're all acting like crazy people. They do not look like happy, healthy people. What would happen if we took our power back and and realized that as a unified force, the lovers represent unity and wholeness. If we were to recognize our own wholeness as a collective, then we would not have to submit to those chains of oppression. And we would have an opportunity then to reset, to restructure, to reform the conditions of society as they are today. And that would not look like taking away what little people already have. It would be about making sure that everyone had what they needed in order to get a good education, in order to pursue their own dreams, so that they can contribute to society in meaningful ways, so that they can feel a sense of purpose, so that they can learn to appreciate one another's unique skill sets, so that they can take care of their bodies by receiving the kind of medicine that they need and not being, forced into a state of destitution because they have to, buy insulin. It doesn't have to be this way. But in order for us to rebel against these oppressive structures, we have to recognize our own wholeness. If we are unified in our mission to reset and restructure, then something real can happen, We can then leave the past behind. The Eight of Cups is leaving the past behind. And the story I tell when the Eight of Cups comes up is that when a caterpillar spins itself a cocoon, in order to emerge as a butterfly, it first liquefies its body. So we have to disidentify from the old form in order to be reformed in a higher state of being. This is not easy, we all identify with the structures of our own lives, if I, work in a profession, I was a set decorator for many, many years, for 16 years, and I put a lot of energy and effort into being an accomplished set decorator. And it took a long time, right? I worked my way up in that industry, starting out doing like really teeny tiny, independent, low budget, sometimes no budget films. And, eventually got to a point where I was working on big TV shows as a set decorator. I was identified with that because of the time and energy that it took for me to do that. And, because to some degree I got to utilize my creative gifts. I'm a creative person. And that work gave me the opportunity to express myself in a certain way. But I was pretty unhappy in that field for quite some time. I would say about midway through that process of doing that work, it was clear to me that I didn't really like, talk about a hierarchical structure where people at the top are, oppressing everyone below the line. And, you know, what I saw in that world is that cruelty, insanity was rewarded. That I just saw people failing upwards and continuing to be in positions of power and making everybody else who worked for them miserable. I mean, it's not so different from what we're seeing politically right now. I mean, it's part of the same system, right? Again, when you have a society of traumatized people, they create societal structures that are a reflection of that trauma. This is what we're being asked to revision. So again, going back to this idea, it's easy for us as human beings to identify with these elements of our life. I'm a wife or a mother. I'm a set decorator. I'm a PhD. I'm a factory worker. I'm a long distance runner. um, and so it's easy to think of ourselves in this very narrow way. This is who I am. This is what I do. I can't see the myriad of possibilities for myself that fall outside of that identification. And yet sometimes that is exactly what needs to happen. We have to dissolve all of those identifications before we can emerge on the other side as a transformed version of ourselves. I mean, sometimes we're lucky. For me, it was like a flash of insight. And, actually an intention. I set an intention to move throughout the world and notice, be able to receive signs and symbols about what it is that I might do next. What is my purpose? What is my calling? If it's not to be a set decorator, if this isn't making it happen for me, what do I do now? And, I was walking around in a quandary for quite some time. But because I was opening up to the possibility that maybe this wasn't all of who I was or what I was meant to do, I was able to receive flashes of insight, which helped me move into becoming a set decorator. And then that eventually led me to wanting to be a therapist. So the Eight of Cups is saying we have to be willing to completely dissolve, disidentify from the structures that we have built out of trauma, to completely let all of that go so that we can vision a new way, so that we can start over completely based on a new set of principles. And, what I always like to point out, many spiritual traditions talk about this phase of development as being the dark night of the soul. That this is a very frightening place to be. We can see that it doesn't behoove us to stay where we're at, but it's terrifying to walk away from it and let it all go and move in the direction towards the absolute unknown. It's incredibly discombobulating. It is a frightening state of being. And usually we only do it when we're really up against a wall at our wits' end. Again, for those of you who follow me, I'm sober. I'm sober 25 years. Nobody gets sober because things are mildly irritating. The only way you're really motivated to change your life to that degree is when things are really bad, when they're bleak, when you're hitting bottom, as they say in rooms of recovery. That I'm only willing to walk away from my old solution, my old identification, when it's clear that, that will lead to absolute destruction. And then there's an opening that happens, right? I know I can't do it this way. I have no idea how I'm going to do it or what's possible, but I'm willing to leave it all behind in order to open up to this new vision for my life. And certainly in my personal experience with that happened. That resources that I could never see before were suddenly offered to me when I was willing to say, I can't do it this way anymore. The universe conspired to shift me in a new direction, one that was more meaningful, more connected, more life affirming than the one I had chosen for myself. I mean, or chosen, the one that I had found. Utilizing drugs and alcohol was a coping mechanism for me because I too know what it's like to be subjected to these conditions and to try to cobble together a life out of those conditions and continue to recreate at all levels that trauma. So my best plan was just to self-medicate, to drink away the pain, to disassociate, check out. And then that stopped working. That didn't work. And at that point, when I was ready to walk away and not know where I was going, then things opened up in a new way. The world felt more loving, more welcoming. I was suddenly in the presence of a kind of unconditional uh, regard from others. And really, this is the vision that I hold for our society, where we are empathetic towards one another, where we are able to notice what someone might need and offer assistance when we can, when it's appropriate, out of a real sense of care that that we are connected, we are the same. That me doing harm to you actively does harm to myself, and vice versa. When I care for you, I'm caring for myself. That this is really the message of the Six of Cups. The Six of Cups is loving like before you've ever had your heart broken. It's loving with an unguarded heart. It requires vulnerability and I would say courage too, right? The courage to put yourself out there completely, to offer your authentic love, attention, assistance, to make that available to others, and then also to receive it in kind, right? This is an equal exchange of love and affection. And this is the tonal quality that we're being called to move towards. If we are letting go of the trauma, we are moving towards connection. And all the ways that that might play out in society at large. And, this is just a natural part of the cycle. So that's also what Spirit wants us to know. Just like eclipses are a natural celestial event that happens periodically. The desecration of old structures in order to build anew, empires fall. They have throughout human history, and then something new comes in to take its place. This is a natural part of this cycle of change. And it behooves us to pay attention to what season of the cycle we are in. And that is really what the Wheel of Fortune is. It's there to remind us that everything happens in seasons and cycles. And so take heart, spring always follows winter. Winter is a time of death, of hibernation, seeds freezing in the dark earth to be born again in spring. And this is what we're being called to move in the direction towards warmth, towards connection, towards empathy, towards love. And that includes self-love. In fact, this is, I think, a really important part of this. The way that I think about the Six of Pentacles is you can't transmit what you haven't got. It's hard to offer love and care to others when we have excluded ourselves from that equation. So there is something powerful, well, especially when you grew up in households where you didn't get your needs met. It's somewhat of a quandary at times to be able to identify what our needs are and tend to them in a good way within ourselves. The Six of Pentacles is giving from the overflow. We can afford to be generous with our time and our energy and our resources when our coffers are full. So it's a little bit like putting the oxygen mask on yourself first before you help the person next to you. Make sure you're tending to your own basic needs, and then you have more to give to others. You have more to share of yourself when you are noticing, I'm tired, so I'm going to let myself rest. I am hungry, so I'm going to feed myself nourishing food. I'm feeling agitated or disconnected. I'm going to go on a walk in the woods and feel that gentle connection to nature, calm my central nervous system. So listening in and recognizing what state you're in is an essential part of knowing then how to address what do I need in this moment that is basic and simple that I can give to myself so that I have a deeper reservoir of resource to share with my fellow humans. These are all really important parts of how we're going to be available for this reset. And so again, this idea of looking inward. If I don't know how I'm feeling, how am I going to be sensitively attuned to how you're feeling? The inner work that I do for myself to be able to connect with powerful emotions, whether they're ecstatic or overwhelmingly painful, if I can't tolerate those emotional experiences, then I'm definitely not going to be sensitively attuned to what's going on in people that I'm in relationship with. If I haven't done my own inner work, I'm intolerant of any emotional expression from you. So this going inward and connecting deeply with myself is actually part of how I show up in the world in a good way. How I can see what's needed and bring whatever skill set I have to help problem solve whatever issues may be arising in the present moment. The Two of Swords is having a peaceful heart as a result of quieting the mind. And you can see that she's blindfolded. And the reason she's blindfolded is she isn't looking to the external elements of life to inform her about who she is, where she's at, how she's going to come to the world at large. She is going within. She is grounded in this own inner truth. And then she is able to meet the world in a good way. Again, it's sort of like not getting like, yeah, things look really intense and dire. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now that could easily move us into a state of hopelessness. It's too big. There's too much to deal with. But if we can go inward and find our own inner resourcing, stay grounded in this sense of our own inner wisdom, and then move out into the world from that place of regulation, wise mind, we're probably going to meet those chaotic and turbulent circumstances in a better way. And then finally, this is such an interesting card, this one, because it's really asking us to hold space for nuance and to take a bigger view of our situation. The things that are being lost our civil liberties, um, our jobs, um, governmental departments that take care of people's needs. We are all feeling the grief around this, or many of us are feeling the grief around this. And it is important to grieve when there is loss. But we can't allow that grief to eclipse from our vision all the opportunities that there are right now in the present moment to connect. Even as we grieve the loss, we are being called to come together. Remember, when we are unified in our purpose, then we are able to take our power back. And so it's important that we recognize it isn't either or, it's and both. We can both grieve what is happening and still align ourselves with like-minded souls in order to formulate a cohesive, kind collective invested in mutual aid and support. The Two of Cups in the tarot is true love. And he can't see it. He can't avail himself of it when he is so immersed in his grief that that's all he can see. It's not spiritual bypass. It's not ignoring how dire the situation is. But even in the midst of that, we must turn our attention towards relationships with others who are seeking a kinder, more egalitarian society that wishes to care for all its members. So, I don't know, that's what we're being called to keep in mind during this period of reset. Notice what you need right now. Being resourced, having inner resources is going to be really important and really powerful as we make this transition into the unknown. And hold this vision of kindness, mutual aid and support, move in that direction. Know that we have built a society based on trauma, but it is now time to let it go, and that something new can come in to take its place. I hope this was helpful. I wish you many blessings and much love. Take care.